An 86-year-old blind woman stood in my courtroom facing $14,200 in parking tickets she could not have gotten. I knew in the first 60 seconds that the system had failed her completely. What I didn't know yet was that she was one of 237 victims and that her neighbor had done this to her on purpose. My name is Judge Judith Shind. I've been on this bench for 43 years. I've seen fraud, identity theft, clerical disasters. But what walked into my courtroom that Tuesday morning was something different. This wasn't a crime committed against a stranger. This was calculated, personal, and evil. Margaret Chen stood before me holding a white cane, her daughter steadying her arm. The prosecutor, David Hastings, was reading off 47 violations like a grocery list. Unpaid meters, street cleaning fines, expired registration. He wanted every penny plus penalties. I stopped him. Did you actually read this file before walking in here? He blinked. Yes, Your Honor. The defendant has failed to appear and ignored citations consistently. Failed to appear. I let that sit. Mrs. Chen, how long have you been blind? 12 years, Your Honor. Macular degeneration. I turned back to Hastings. The ticket started 3 years ago. She's been blind for 12. Does that timeline interest you at all? His face went pale. Here's what nobody in the entire municipal system had stopped to ask. How does a blind woman who surrendered her license 12 years ago rack up 47 parking violations across Los Angeles at midnight? The first ticket was on Melrose Avenue at 2 a.m. The next was Venice Beach. Then Hollywood. Then Koreatown at midnight. Mrs. Chen, I said, were you frequenting nightclubs at 85 years old? A small smile crossed her face despite everything. I was in bed by 9, Your Honor. Then her daughter Linda spoke. They had sold the car 6 months after Margaret moved in. The buyer never properly registered it. He just kept driving on Margaret's old plates. Every ticket went to a woman who couldn't see, at an address she no longer lived at, for a car she no longer owned. The system didn't care. It sent notices to the wrong address. It escalated the fines. It eventually issued an arrest warrant. Automatically. Without a single human being stopping to ask one basic question. Hastings tried to save himself. Your Honor, if I could request a continuance to investigate further, denied. We're investigating right now. I looked at everything in front of me. Linda had documented her mother's entire daily schedule with timestamps and photos. Home care Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Physical therapy Tuesdays. Dinner with family Sundays. On every single date a ticket was issued, Margaret was somewhere else entirely. Documented. Photographed. Proven. I turned to Hastings one final time. The city is pursuing $14,000 from a blind woman in her 80s for violations she physically could not have committed. If you force me to rule from this bench, I will make sure every news station in Los Angeles knows that story by tonight. Is that what the city wants? He went completely white. My ruling, every ticket after the sale date dismissed entirely. Margaret would pay $225 as good faith settlement for the 3 tickets issued, while the car was still technically hers. The city would investigate the registration fraud and find whoever had actually been driving. By 5 o'clock, the city attorney himself called. Not Hastings, the attorney. They accepted everything. But that's not where the story ends. That's where it gets darker. 3 weeks later, Detective Sarah Morrison from the Fraud Division called me. The man we arrested is talking. You need to hear what he's saying. She came to my chambers with a file thick enough to stop a door. The man's name was David Torres. He ran an identity theft ring, specifically targeting elderly Asian immigrants over 75 with valid licenses. He had a corrupt contact inside the DMV feeding him records. He'd create fake registrations under their names, sell them to people with warrants who needed clean plates. 237 victims identified so far. Then she slid a photograph across my desk. Torres standing outside Margaret's building. He lived 2 floors above her. He had looked this woman in the eye in the elevator, probably held the door for her, then gone upstairs and stolen her identity because he knew she rarely went out. He had chosen his own neighbor on purpose. I felt sick. The detective kept going. Torres had kept detailed records of every fine collected from his victims. The city had collected nearly $4 million in fines and fees from people who had committed no violations. Most of them paid without fighting. They were scared, elderly, many didn't speak English fluently. They didn't understand the system. They just paid. Margaret Chen was the only one who walked into a courtroom and refused to accept it. I testified at the restitution hearing 6 weeks later, sitting in a different courtroom this time, as a witness. I explained exactly how Margaret's case came to me, how the red flags were everywhere, how the system was designed to process people, not protect them, how if she had been less persistent or less lucky in which courtroom she walked into, she would have lost her home. The city settled. Full restitution plus interest for every victim. $283,000 returned. And the case triggered a state investigation that forced new protections into law, mandatory fraud screening for defendants over 75, automatic legal assistance for non-English speakers, real accountability for cities that ignored obvious warning signs. I called Margaret to tell her, because you fought back, 236 other people are getting their money returned. You changed the system. She was quiet for a long moment. I just didn't want to lose my home. I know, but you did something much bigger than that. Then she said something I've never forgotten. Will they really change, Judge? Or will they go back to the old ways when people stop paying attention? I didn't have a clean answer. She was probably right to be skeptical. What I told her was the only honest thing I could say. I don't know if the whole system changes, but I promise you, every time a case like yours comes in front of me, I'll ask the questions that need asking. At least one courtroom will do better. Then it was worth it, she said. Margaret Chen died 2 years later. Natural causes. Peacefully in the home she fought so hard to keep. Her daughter called to let me know. She had given me a bookmark the last time I saw her, cream-colored with small blue flowers. She'd knitted it herself over 3 weeks, she said, because her hands shook now and it took longer. I keep it in my desk drawer. Before I take the bench every single morning, I look at it, not as a decoration, as a question. Does this make sense? Because that's the whole job. Not processing cases, not moving files, asking that one question and having the courage to act when the answer is no. The system isn't broken by accident. It's broken by design, built to move efficiently, not to protect people justly. But when one person refuses to be processed, when one blind 86-year-old woman stands up and insists on being seen as a human being, everything around her has no choice but to change. That bookmark is still in my desk. I haven't forgotten.